applicants, when you speak into your mic, does it light up red?
Yeah.
Should.
Yeah.
Okay, good. We should be good to go then. I mean,
Okay.
Sarah and Stacy, do yours.
Mine's working.
To start the meeting, welcome everybody to the, gosh, it's already August 18th of 2020 City Planning Commission meeting. We're kind of expecting a quick one today from the agenda standpoint. So let's go ahead and get started. And as people may know, we are doing a hybrid type of meeting where we have a live version as well as virtual. So as somebody wants to speak from the virtual standpoint, you'll be promoted up and asked to speak at that time. And when you do, please provide your name and address for the record. So with that, Joe, if you don't mind, let's go ahead and start with the consent agenda items.
Sure. So the first, I'm going to read the C2, which is the one that's moving forward, and then we'll do the continuances.
Okay,
Usually
sounds
it's the
good.
reverse, but I think that might be quicker.
Okay,
Docket item C2, case number CPC 2020-00128. A request to approve a project plan in District UR to allow for a 96,000 square foot office warehouse addition on about 19 acres located at the southeast corner of North Universal Avenue and Corporate Drive. Staff is recommending approval of this one without or with conditions.
okay. Are there any questions by the commission to staff? If they want to speak, or is there anybody online from the public that would like to speak on docket item C2?
The applicant is online. His name is David Mandelkern. I'm not sure if he wants to speak or not, but I've unmuted him.
Okay, and we do understand that the applicant has accepted all the conditions listed?
You speak to that? If you're on now, could you share with us whether do you know if Mr. Mandelkern's okay with the conditions?
You asking me, Joe?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
asking you if you know if the applicant's okay with the conditions on the docket item C2.
Yes.
Okay. Any public testimony? So therefore, I'm looking for a motion on docket item C2.
Docket item C2 with conditions.
So I've got a motion and a second. Lisa, do you mind taking roll call, please?
Commissioner Allender, I can't hear anything. Can you hear me? Baker? Beasley?
Aye.
Crowell? Enders? Hill?
Aye.
Rojas? And Sadowski?
Aye.
I can't hear anyone in the chamber. Can the rest of you hear the folks in the chamber?
I can't on my end either, Lisa.
I can't either.
No, I can't hear him.
Okay, well, I can see you, so gotcha.
Well,
Yep.
hold on.
Difficulty here will be try to fix it here.
Heard you that time.
Say, I heard Kobe.
Yeah.
Tyler's in the chamber, right?
Yes, I am.
Well, I
Yep.
heard you, Tyler.
Okay, so it's fixed.
Just us on the. Okay, so Lisa, did you get everybody then on the vote?
I did. Can we do it again just for the record?
Sure, that'll be fine.
Okay, because I could see you, but I couldn't hear you. For case C2, Commissioner Allender,
Aye.
Baker,
Aye.
Beasley,
Aye.
Crowell, Enders,
Aye.
okay, now I hear you. And Rojas
Aye.
and Sadowski.
Aye.
Okay,
Not
so
everybody.
docket item C2 is passed 8-0. Thank you, Mr. Mandelkern. Good luck with your project. So I guess we got to go back to docket item C1 and then all the rest of continuances, or are we going to do them all at once?
I think we can do them all at once. I did confirm the dates are correct. The dates reflected on the docket.
Okay, and that's even on docket items, was it
Docket 10.
10.1 and 10.2? Okay,
Yeah, they are correct.
okay.
Can everyone hear us though? I don't know.
Can everybody hear
We should
Joe
move on.
okay? Okay.
Remaining docket items C1 and then docket item 1 through proposed to be continued as stated on the docket.
Docket items C1 and then items 1 through 16 are all being continued as written in the agenda on the dates suggested. So with that, looking for a motion to continue all of those cases.
Chair Crowell, I move to continue docket item C1 and 1 through 16 as written on the docket.
Sounds good. Okay, got a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Oh, sorry. So I've got a motion and a second. Lisa, do you mind taking a roll call, please, on the continuance of these cases?
Mhm. Commissioner Allender,
Aye.
Baker,
Aye.
Beasley,
Aye.
Crowell,
Aye.
Enders,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Rojas,
Aye.
and Sadowski.
Aye.
So motion passes that basically all the cases on the agenda have been continued until future dates as stated in the agenda. So that takes us through the regular docket items, and the remaining 2 docket items are more for discussion and by the commission and some training and different things. So if you don't mind, Joe, let's go ahead and move to docket item 17.
17 is a discussion item regarding the rules to change the rules to allow meetings via teleconference even after the state of emergency expires. And I'll let Sarah speak to this, but I do have the document that I've shared to show you all what the text change.
About this at the last meeting. And since then, the state of emergency has been extended until January 16th, but I still think it would be a good idea to amend the rules so that there's no question that, anytime that you need to meet via video conference or have a hybrid meeting like we're doing today, that we can do that. So I removed we had previously amended the rule to state that we could meet via video conference during a state of emergency. And so I just removed that to say you can meet via video conference for any reason, essentially.
Okay, any questions by any of the commission about this proposed rule change? Need to have a motion and acceptance of this, I take it?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, is there a certain way you'd like this stated?
No, I think just I move to amend the rules to reflect, the change shown on the screen. That's fine.
Okay. Maybe somebody here in the chamber can make that motion?
I motion to amend the rules according to the change on the screen.
Second.
Okay, so I have a motion and a second to amend the rules, and I'm just going to read it, Article 5B2, to allow hearings conducted by video conference, telephone conference, or other electronic means. So we have that stated in the record. So I've got a motion and a second. With that, Lisa, do you mind taking a roll call, please, on this motion?
Commissioner Allender,
Aye.
Baker,
Aye.
Beasley,
Aye.
Crowell,
Aye.
Enders,
Aye.
Hill, Rojas, Sadowski.
Aye.
Motion passes to amend the rules to allow electronic meetings as we're doing today. Item number 18.
Item 18 is a discussion item or work session topic that was requested, I believe, at the last meeting, specifically that we described to you kind of what staff does kind of from the beginning of a project all the way to the end. So you understand where your role, both in the time frame, but also just in the general process is as a commission. So I do have one slide to share. There's a lot on it.
Okay.
What's projecting out there is partly covered on one side by the screen. So I'll try to, when we get to that part of the process, see if we can get that shifted over some way, or I'll just be a little more careful with what I describe. But what I thought would be helpful to start with was to kind of map out the entire process. And I realize there's a lot on here and some of it might be hard to read, but I'm going to walk you through step by step. And I am fine with y'all asking questions as we go through this, because you might have questions about each step or one step or the next and how they relate to each other. But I find this is the easiest way to actually understand the process is by looking at a flow chart like this. So one of the questions that's been asked is kind of how projects kind of come into being when they're first when staff first becomes aware of them. So it varies quite a lot how staff first becomes aware of a project. Sometimes what typically happens would be a property owner convenes a design team, so to speak, who first approaches us to with a phone call or an email asking about our thoughts on a project. Usually it's a very high level, wanting to know if, they're planning this type of use or that type of a certain floor area of a building, and they kind of want to know, is that going to trigger some sort of zoning review or entitlement approval? And we may not know anything else about the project. So we're often asked to provide that type of feedback. Sometimes it initiates much more formally where a design team and maybe a land use attorney have been working with a property owner or a buyer for quite some time, and they've really drawn up a lot of plans. They've worked with a lot of other agencies, and then they reach out to us and ask for a pre-application meeting, which is required in most cases. There are some application processes that don't require a pre-application meeting. And then a third way, sorry, is there a question? Is sometimes people do a development assistance team meeting, which is often confused with our development review committee. There are two different things. The development assistance team is a complimentary meeting that's hosted by our department, where we convene a variety of city departments to get together and look at a concept usually of what's proposed for a piece of ground. And we provide high level comments back in writing to the applicant. Sometimes an applicant, in most cases, an applicant will need to go to a development assistance team meeting and a pre-application meeting before they file, because the DAT's purpose is slightly different than a pre-app. A pre-app meeting that staff would host, that my staff would host, is more about, here's the process required and here's the expectations for getting the project to planning commission and then to city council or the board of zoning adjustment. DAT tends to be much more about really big picture stuff about, if it's an incentivized project or if it's in a contaminated property. And it's much more about, less about the process and more about what are the red flags or big issues on that property. Of course, if we see in a pre-application meeting that there are red flags, we always let the customer know. We very rarely disclose what staff's position on the project will be at a pre-application meeting. And that's often because we don't know at that point. We don't have enough information in front of us to know typically at a pre-application meeting. And in many cases, it might be improper because we haven't done the analysis of the project. There are exceptions to that when see our role at that step in the process as being advisory to the applicant. Certainly the applicant always has the right to ask for approval of something, or very rarely do they not have the right to do that, to apply for something and go down the path. But if we know that the odds are stacked against them, either because there's a lot of policies working against their proposal, and usually there's multiple reasons. There's policies working against it. Staff already has a clear position on it. We feel obligated to let that customer know, hey, this is what you're up against. And so they have an educated decision to make about whether to file an application and proceed down that path. So we do make exceptions to that when we feel like it's important for the customer to know, so that they're not surprised down the path. Application and DAT process works. Are there any questions about those two and kind of how the projects kind of come into being when staff first finds out about it, or any?
Joe, I have a question. So
Sure.
The order of the development assistance team meeting and the pre-application meeting is not necessarily determined. They could go in either order, correct?
It's usually better for the customer to go in the order of if they're doing both, to go to a DAT then a pre-app.
Okay, okay.
Assistance team, who are the members on your team there?
So it's a similar composition to the development review committee, but it is sometimes different people from different departments or different people from the same departments. And it's managed by our development, I think is his official title concierge, development concierge, John Pajor, who facilitates that meeting. And it's really focused on getting everyone together and letting the customer ask questions and letting us say, we don't have our code books out and stuff at this meeting. It's very high level. It's more of, these are the issues that you might encounter. These are the things I see. I think it helps some people put together pro formas and things like that. They kind of have more of an expectation about whether this is feasible financially. I think that's what a lot of customers find beneficial about it. Whereas the pre-application meeting, we do get into some of that stuff, but the main point of it is what does public engagement ordinance mean for this project? This is a special use permit, and how is that different from a development plan? It's a finer grain, and it's more about getting the project through the entitlement process from a zoning perspective.
So Joseph, this is Forrest Ding. Touch again on this one slide that's the pass fail.
Into that step yet?
You haven't gotten there yet, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I can go there now. So what typically happens is that what will come next, well, there's really nothing typical about this part of the process. Sometimes people have a pre-app, and excuse me if I use abbreviations and acronyms, but some people have a pre-application meeting and then move right into filing the application. They might meet with us the day before. We tend to have pre-application meetings every Thursday and Friday, and the application deadlines are always on Fridays at noon. So there are times where we meet with people on Thursday and then they apply on Friday. That's sometimes not a great idea because we might give them feedback on Thursday that they want to resolve before they apply. But that happens sometimes. What's more common is it can be 2 to 4 months later on average that someone actually applies. So once they apply, like I said, the deadline's noon on Friday. We have that deadline basically every 2 weeks. So if you apply past the deadline, for example, tomorrow at noon or not tomorrow, it's not Thursday, Friday at noon is a deadline. And right after that deadline, if you file it at 1 or 2 o'clock, you're automatically in the next cycle. So you can apply anytime during those 2 weeks and you go towards that CPC hearing date. And that's really what customers are usually interested in is, when is my DRC meeting? And the reason they want to know that is because that's when they expect to get staff comments back. When is my planning commission meeting? When do I have to do my neighborhood meeting? And we plot all that, help them plot that out at a pre-application meeting on a calendar. Deadline at noon on Friday, we do a quality control review at that afternoon. And the quality control review is to literally make sure that we have, if it's a special use permit, that they're identifying the use proposed on the plans, so that we have basic information and what's been provided that's sufficient for our reviewers to understand what is proposed. If they don't understand what is proposed, they're not going to be able to give comments back, or at least very good comments. So that's the point of the QCR. If it passes QCR, then we do all this stuff in Compass that causes it to pass. And the customer would then get an email saying, here's your case number, here's your planner, it's past QCR, and you also have an invoice to pay. And as long as you pay that invoice by next Wednesday, and again, this is on a Friday, as long as you pay that invoice by next Wednesday, you're on the docket that you applied for. If you failed, we identify what caused it to fail and ask you to fix it. And you actually, as long as you do that by the following Wednesday, you're still on the same docket. So there's an opportunity there. That's why that red circle is on here. Any step in the process that can be repeated is identified with a circle. The red circle means that if the repeating of it can delay the process. So it's possible that if you fail and you don't, and you resubmit and you still aren't meeting what we commented on, you're not going to be able to keep that deadline or that CPC hearing date. Alan Forrestine, let you share whatever thought or question you had on that pass-fail step.
So yeah, that's part of the system entry. Is
Yes,
what
that-
that's referring to. Okay.
Nation on that Friday, whether we have sufficient information, and if we do, we pass it, and if not, we fail it. So then the applicant would I would say about half the applications that come in fail QCR. We have a fair number of applications that come in without a pre-application meeting and they've applied for the wrong thing. That's a pretty common thing. Or we don't know enough about, we've never met with them and we don't know enough about the project to even know if the special use permit they applied for is the right request. So we have to stop the case at that point and say, hey, we need to talk to you. What are you trying to do with this property? What are you trying to do with this use, so that we can advise you as to what the right process is. So that's a fairly common reason for the failed QCRs. And then probably the second most common is just missing plan sheets, missing information on plans.
So I guess my question is, how detailed do they have to come in with to a pre-application or an application filing?
So it depends on the type of approval they need. If it's a one-step approval, and by that I mean if they're not coming back to you all with a final plan later or to staff with a final plan later, then they need to be pretty detailed. So that's going to be typically a project plan. You need to be detailed because the theory of a project plan is that you're supposed to be ready to get building permits right after approval. You should be ready to go. But a development plan is typically can be more conceptual in nature. The way the code is written, it has the flexibility in it for someone to say, you know what, I want a development plan because I just need entitlement. I need to know that what I want to do is okay. And then, but I don't know all the details yet. I haven't hired landscape architects to prepare a plan. So can I do that later? If they want to do that, there's flexibility in the code that allows them to do a more conceptual development plan. And then they can come back through, they can self-elect, so to speak, to do a project plan later.
Okay.
Ordinarily, that's not required. Development plan is a one-step process, but if the applicant's willing to obligate themselves to come back through CPC later with a project plan, we will, and we're aware of that at the staff level, then we will pass it on QCR if it's just a conceptual style plan. Enough information in it for us to know that whether they need waivers or deviations of some type, because typically those can only be granted by the city council. So project plans don't go to city council, they just stop with the planning commission. So if there's insufficient information on the plans for us to evaluate that, then we're going to ask for it. We're going to fail it on QCR and say, hey, look, we can't tell if you're doing this public improvement that would be required, because that, if you're not going to do it, you need a waiver, and you can't get a waiver with a project plan. So we need to know that now.
So Joseph, this first thing again,
Mhm.
I've got a question on the very first process, the step, the development assistance team.
Mhm.
You had mentioned the application filing is due noon on Friday. So what type of schedule is available for people to come in to do the development assistant team? Is that just make a call and we set it up, or you only do it on certain days? How does that part of it work?
That's a good question. I didn't touch on that. They meet every other week on Thursday, and they offer 2 meeting slots per Thursday.
Okay, thank you.
On that to present their project and to get feedback. Commissioner Beasley.
Thank you. Oh, I'm back. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So after they've paid their invoice, and whether it passes or fails, let's say that the customer, in the case of a fail, they resubmit by the following Wednesday and pay their invoice. What the planner will do, and this is all set up in Compass, and if I mention Intergov, just know that means Compass. From the staff side of things, we call it Intergov a lot, but it's the same product. But there's a lot of steps that the planner takes in Compass that cause the application to move forward after it passes QCR and the invoice is paid. And that is reflected, the way this chart works, it goes down and then around and back up. So that's where looking at this docket case and release for review step. So what this shows you here is that we're in week 1 of the application after the application's been filed. And what docket case means is it means more than just putting it on a docket. It means all the various internal steps or staff level steps that have to occur kind of get fired off or created at that point, so that it's built into the system so that we know things that need to happen are happening. Review at that time, and that's when the planner determines, I think I've mentioned probably before that we have exactly 38 reviewing agencies, and some of those are external like MoDOT or levy districts and stuff like that, but most of them are internal. Not all of them review every case. For example, the streetcar group in Public Works is a reviewing agency, but they don't review things in Shoal Creek area. There's no relevance to what they do for those projects. So they review stuff that is within proximity to the streetcar corridor and the planned extension of the streetcar. So the planner makes a determination in most cases about who reviews what. We know that on a project plan, for example, if it had a prior approval of a development plan, it doesn't always make sense to give the same reviewer of the development plan the project plan review, because they're going to get confused. They don't understand the difference between the two, and they may very well duplicate comments that you've already passed and the council's already passed. So there's no need for that. So there's a lot of different decisions like that that go into the decision making for the planner on who to assign those reviews to. But because of the case type, reviews go to certain agencies like Stacy's Group Land Development Division. They're probably one of the most common, if not the most common reviewer on our case types that come through Planning Commission. And a lot of our cases, when you create them in Compass, they automatically create a review for land development, and they're going to need to review it. So we just leave it in there. Viewers get 10 business days to review the first round of plans. So that's 2 full weeks. Next, as we move in, by that point, we're into week 2.
Just before you move on there, just on the review on the 38 reviewers, are they consistent? Is it just one person from that department that reviews, or is there a team? How do we get consistency on the reviews across all the applicants?
It really depends on the agency. Land development, for example, is very consistent. It's always Stacy. So that you're going to see, you can kind of tell, I think, if you're a commissioner, where the consistencies and inconsistencies are by the discussion of what conditions or corrections need to be changed at the hearing. There's some departments where there's a lot of inconsistency, and what typically happens is that a group or division, their manager gets the review and then they reassign it to someone else. We try to limit that as much as possible, and that's one of the reasons we still have an actual DRC meeting, is to see the people who actually are reviewing it and whether they're the same people. And there's a lot of discussion, when we went to Compass, and all these reviews are digital now. Do we really need to meet? And I think that's one reason we do need to meet, is to make sure that there's more consistency. But to answer your question, it really depends on the agency. Some are very good about having the same person review things, and some reassign things a lot.
Right, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, I have a question. Do you have instances where you have those 38 reviewers and some of the conditions may contradict each other, or there might be some sort of weird overlaps? And do the planners have to sort of reconcile that?
Yes and yes. That happens.
Okay.
A fair amount. There's, and I hate to put Stacy on the spot, but there's a particular overlap that she keeps encountering with water services, and I'll let her kind of maybe go into that. That might give you guys a good idea of how this happens.
Yeah, we have, because of how land development plays into this process, we also cover, when I'm reviewing for storm sewer as well as sanitary sewer. And at the DRC level, the Development Review Committee, there are also members of the Water Services Department who represent those two groups. So there have been times when Water Services has different information directly available to them that I don't always have access to. So especially when you're in the downtown area where it's the combined sewer area, they may know 6 months ago, we did a project to separate everything in this area, so it's no longer technically considered combined. I won't have access to that information to make that determination. So there are times that we do contradict. Most of the time, we try to get to those at the Development Review Committee meeting. We try to bring those up because as reviewers in the system, we can see the conditions that every other department has put on that case before it's accepted. So anytime we as reviewers see it, I personally try to reach out to those staff members and see if we can get that ironed out before it gets to commission. But yes, it does happen just because there are some overlap in the duties that we're responsible for covering.
Boards haven't been updated or?
Services, there is some information that's proprietary that they are very protective of and that they do not want released to a more general audience, sometimes even city staff, depending on what's in that information. So yes, if their as-built drawings haven't been updated yet to show their mapping to show that they've separated and I can't see it, I won't know. I have staff members that I can reach out to and contact and ask, but sometimes the timeliness of the response isn't quick enough for the review deadlines I have to meet. So I normally have to make a judgment call and then keep following up with them up until we have the staff reports. Normally I try to keep the planners aware of these situations as well, so they know. So they will try to check in with me before they finalize their reports to make sure we've gotten as many of the conflicting issues resolved before you guys see the staff reports.
One of the other things to throw into this is that you note that this part of the process is kind of going in from week 1 to week 2. And remember that you all have meetings basically every other week. So in the course of a 6-week cycle between when an application's filed and it finally gets to you, we've had 2 other planning commission meetings. So what staff is doing, what my staff and what Stacy's doing at that point in time, when we're trying to review something that you'll see in 4 weeks or 5 weeks, we're writing a staff report or sitting here for something that's 3 cycles earlier. So that's the repetitive cycle, and keeping on top of, you really have to be a project manager to keep on top of what is before the planning commission next versus what's at DRC, which is usually about 2 weeks later, as you'll see when we get there. And then what is just coming in, and is it sufficient to be distributed to reviewers? Have we picked the right reviewers? Did we give it to the Water Services Stormwater Group and Stacy, like she was just describing? And then when we get to DRC a couple of weeks later, we do have those conversations. A thing about I'll jump ahead just briefly. A thing about DRC that we changed about 4 years ago probably is prior to that, Development Review Committee was all the staff and the applicants in the same room. And when I came to the city 7 years ago, every city I'd worked for before does some version of Development Review Committee, but never with the applicants in the room. And what you had is you had to use LDD and stormwater again. You had 2 groups like that debating, rightfully as they should, who's making the comment and where's the boundaries and scope of the comment, and doing all that in front of the customer. And it was very awkward, to say the least. So we did split those meetings up, and now we have just the staff level review DRC, and then the applicant can elect to have an applicant DRC if they have a lot of questions, or if they want to, or the committee itself can say, we want you to come to the DRC and explain the project more. We have a lot of questions for you. So that's been a big improvement, I think. It allows staff to work together and discuss very openly what we think each agency should comment on. Move on, and these are newer steps in our process that we implemented a couple years ago, is division plan review, which is always on Mondays. So this would be 7 business days after the application filing. And this is the first time that we really sit down as a group and review the project and start to form, our position on the project as staff. This is just my staff, the planners, and the planners from the long range planning division. And the intent of it is to kind of understand what are all the various long planning policies that might relate to this project, and to try to marry those policies with. My staff are kind of experts on the zoning code. The long range planners are experts on the long range plans. And I think some of you, I wanted to include the slide. I couldn't find it, but you may have seen it's kind of an infographic of all the policies that go into play. I think Jeff Williams may have showed this to you in his presentation that he had a couple months ago. There's something like 68 different adopted plans. And of course, we can't know everything that's in all those plans. It's too much. So we do rely upon these external agencies and the long range planning group. And that's really what this meeting is about, to discuss those and start to formulate an opinion. At that time, we make a determination at the staff level as to whether management in the department needs to review it. We typically would do that if we see that the project could be controversial in some way, or if it's just new and different in such a way that we really need them involved. And so that would be the following Monday, a week later, that we do that. And these are just staff meetings. This is kind of how the sausage gets made in terms of developing staff's opinion and perspective and position on a project. 2 days after the management plan review meeting, we would go on to the development review committee meeting. And that's with all the reviewing agencies. They're all invited. They don't all show up. We actually have, since we moved virtual, I think it's actually going better. You got to remember, a lot of the reviewing agencies don't office in City Hall. Some of them are not even in Kansas City. So asking them to show up at City Hall at 8:30 a.m. on a Wednesday, it has a beginning time, but not an end. It's like CPC. So asking them to come and just sit here for potentially 3 or 4 hours sometimes is a big ask. But since we moved virtual, we're getting more participation, and we'll probably just, I think, continue to do it virtual because of that. Dean, I think you could probably just imagine, I mean, the planner briefly presents the case and what we know about it. Based upon what was discussed at division plan review or management plan review, we may let the committee know what direction we're moving towards in terms of our recommendation, so that they are aware, because their comments might change depending on that. And then we literally go around the room and we let everyone speak, and we sometimes hear comments that are kind of totally on base and don't need any influence, and sometimes we hear comments that are kind of out of left field, or perhaps out of proportion to what the request is. And we do, as our planners, have to kind of work with that reviewer to bring them back on course, or to perhaps edit their comment so that it's more proportional or more fair related to the project. I'm sorry, before we leave DRC, before we move on from each case at DRC, we do vote on it. We make a committee makes a recommendation to approve, to recommend approval of, or recommend continuance, or recommend denial. Sometimes we recommend continuance. Red circle. It's uncommon. We do that maybe in 10% of cases we do that.
Joe, your audio's cutting in and out for me at least.
I'm sorry.
Your audio was cut off there for probably about 30 seconds to a minute, for me at least, when you were talking about DRC and the different groups.
For me
And
as
so-
well.
Be even closer to the mic. Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
DRC is that before we move on from each case discussed at DRC, the committee makes motions and seconds and makes a vote just like you guys do to make a recommendation to the planning commission. And sometimes we recommend continuance because we just have a lot of questions or the project's not ready to move forward to the planning commission. And I was suggesting that maybe it's 10% of the cases. And then I modified my suggestion to say maybe 20% of the cases. Most of them proceed out of DRC with the recommendation for approval with conditions. And what we do then is within 2 days after that, we put all those comments and the vote and everything into a letter, and we send that to the customer, all the contacts on the applicant team. And the letter not only gives them the comments, it also tells them what they can do next, what their options are. It tells them that they can attend an applicant DRC if they let the planner know by a certain date. It tells them they don't, that they can resubmit plans if they want to. It's optional. At some point, they'll have to if we gave them plan corrections, especially if you all recommend approval with plan corrections. They're going to have to do it at some point. But we have built it into the process that they could do it now, and it saves them time on the back end. So there's a lot of different things in that letter. We do find, to be quite honest, sometimes some of our applicants simply don't read the letter. We get resubmittals sometimes with nothing. We've made 20 comments and sometimes none of them have been addressed. So you question why they've even resubmitted. But that's also fortunately somewhat rare. So what's more common is that some of the comments were addressed and some of them aren't addressed. We drop them off of our request, and all you see are the ones that they didn't address. I would say maybe 25% of our applicants take advantage of resubmitting plans before planning commission, and the remaining 75% do it later.
So Joe, I have a question as first thing.
Mm-hmm.
You had said this is where the staff can recommend continuance. Is this also where they can recommend denial?
Yeah, this is the point where we tell the applicant what our recommendation will likely be to the planning commission. Recommend denial, but that doesn't mean their process stops. That they still have to come to you all. DRC doesn't really have any authority other than with preliminary plats. It has very little authority to approve or to take final action on anything.
So in the case of denial, do some people just pull their application before they can go before the planning commission?
They do, but that's really rare. We very rarely recommend denial at DRC. Sometimes everyone else at DRC is good with it, except that it just doesn't conform with the long range plan, And so what we say, we tell the customer that, and we tell them that as planning staff, we probably will have to recommend denial to the planning commission. But everyone else went ahead and gave comments, and we always do that just in case the commission wants to approve it, so that you have comments to conditions and plan corrections to approve.
So I have a follow-up to that then. So when we see on our actual docket where the staff recommendation is denial, that's from this earlier meeting, or is that later in the process as well?
So here's the thing with DRC. Sometimes there's a lot of things. Sometimes a project has a lot of issues, not just from a long range planning or land use policy, but just from it's having a hard time meeting public works standards, water services standards. So the whole committee would, in those cases, likely recommend denial if it seems evident that they can't meet any of those standards. So they're kind of looking at it more of a technical plan-based perspective, whereas ultimately the recommendation you guys are getting from staff is based upon that plus policy, which is more in the realm of the long-range planning group and my group review and working with long-range planning. So it's really kind of a combination of the two, the recommendation you're receiving.
Joseph,
We tend to let the committee know what that's why we have that management and division plan review, is so we can let them know kind of the policy impact and the lens we viewed it through from a policy perspective. At that time, what we're going to recommend. And we always try to tell the customer at that time as well.
Joseph, this is Commissioner Hill. I have a quick follow-up question, and I'm not even sure if this is a fair question to ask. So I'll give an explanation. I'm trying to find out what is a higher priority or if policy supersedes codes. So an example would be a project that might come to your department or CPC, and they check all the boxes for codes. However, it is not in alignment with like the neighborhood plan.
Mm-hmm.
So is it that the neighborhood plan or the policy that is set forth is, you know, kind of vision of what neighborhoods want to see in their community? Or do you go with, hey, this development can meet, you know, this is a space, it's zoned and approved for this? Well, most of the time, I think we've seen a special use permit be requested along with it. But I'm just trying to find out, when you all are going through the like the DRC or Development Review Committee, which are you which has a heavier weight on your recommendation?
C tends to carry much more weight on a rezoning request than other types of requests. It's not that it doesn't matter on other types, it does. But a lot of our long range planning in Kansas City is done through neighborhood planning. And I think that's probably a legacy thing, but it's also just due to the size of the city. We have 18 what they call area plans, and each of those plans are they're not I think that's the right word, but they're not less than the comprehensive plan. They are kind of a vehicle of it for that particular area. So they are the controlling plan that we look to from a policy perspective. They make recommendations for a variety of things, including land use. So whenever we're talking about rezoning, the central question that we have to answer is whether the land uses allowed by the proposed zoning are compatible and appropriate for that property. And that's why we always look to the land use plan specifically in those long range plans. So I think the answer to your question is it depends on the type of request being made. But in the case of a rezoning, it's very much based upon that policy. If it's a development plan, it could be based upon policy in addition to just a poor site planning or great site planning and other things related to the development itself.
Okay, thank you. And I have one more question. Let's say you come out of the Development Review Committee and the applicant, the docket or the case has recommendations. The applicant receives the letter, but the applicant does not decide to revise plans. Does your department have a heads up on what conditions an applicant might challenge? I'm looking at the extensive work that goes through with the reviews, and it's kind of surprising to me that, in just my limited experience on the commission, that we have applicants that will really go into the weeds on like the conditions. And I was thinking, oh, maybe this is the first time they've seen it, or they've seen it, but there was no, opportunity for them to engage with staff. But thank you for providing this process. So I'm just wondering, do you all have an opportunity to get a heads up from an applicant before it comes before the CPC, when we will get requests from applicants like, hey, can we throw out condition number 5 or number 3? And we have spent some time discussing that, instead of saying, hey, you went through an extensive review process, you received a letter, you had an opportunity. I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So our letter that goes out actually, if let's lead to, I'm just going to pick on Stacy a lot today. So let's say she has 15 conditions and 5 plan corrections. I'm probably not far off from normal. It actually attributes each of those to her. So we identify for our customers all of the reviewers by their name, first and last name. We provide their phone number and email address. And the letter actually advises them to reach out to that individual reviewer first to ask any questions they might have about that. And then, of course, they always have the option to meet with us for applicant DRC. So most of the time we do know going into CPC where the areas of disagreement are between staff and the applicant with regard to the plan corrections and conditions. Yes. And it is not, there are occasions where you'll hear the customer say, well, the staff report was the first time I saw this condition. That does happen on a few cases, like final plats and project plans. There might be a third category that actually don't go to development review committee. So the reviewers put their comments in Compass, and you can still see who made the comments in Compass, but there isn't the same process set up for people to come to another meeting, because there wasn't a first meeting to begin with. However, in most cases, even with that, we still hear from the customer. It's just a matter of whether they've checked Compass to see what their comments are. And sometimes they haven't done that at all, and they just wait for the staff report. There are also, and this is much less common, but there are also situations where at DRC, our comments are more questions than comments, because we just don't understand really all the things they're proposing. So we ask a lot of questions. And in those cases, we tend to ask for a response letter so that we have answers when they resubmit, or we continue the case. So that's an example where we would. But there are circumstances where we've asked a question, they resubmit, and because they've resubmitted, they've changed something on the plan, so then our condition changes. Sometimes that happens too. Either way, we do try to communicate with people. One thing to keep in mind about the applicants is we always use the term applicant, but it's usually a group of people. And the only people that get notified of comments that we put into Compass are the people who have been added as contacts in Compass. So if I'm one of 8 members of an applicant team, but I wasn't added as a contact, yet I'm the one that's asked to go to CPC and present on it, you're probably going to hear that from me, because I didn't get anything. No one told me. So unless the communication on their end is really good, it's possible that that's definitely a circumstance where the communication isn't happening, and they get here and they don't know about the condition until they've seen the staff report, and you might hear that.
Joe, how often does that happen with regards to a disconnect with the applicant and staff? I was just thinking of another case.
In terms of communication, or in terms
communication and collaboration. Is that at the development review committee? That's the real time for the collaboration, by the sounds of it, to answer any conditions that the staff may have.
Right.
Just out of all the applications, would it be like 50% are collaborative, 80% are collaborative?
It's not really based upon the type of application as much as it is the type of the reviewing agency. So we have reviewing agencies that are stable, like LDD, and then others that are unstable in terms of who reviews things. And that's where it can break down. The planner often fields calls, even though our letter directs them to contact that agency. saying, I can't get a hold of this person. So then we try to get a hold of we always try to do that for them if they can't. But as you can imagine, if you have several cases on a docket, you're at this point in the process, you're dealing with another round of cases at CPC. This is about 2 weeks before this project will get to you. So it's the hearing 2 weeks prior. So as you can imagine, there are things that fall through the cracks because of that. Ongoing thing that I know Stacy, I know most of our conversations are about discussing comments and conditions and how to change them or edit them or respond to a customer about them. It's an ongoing thing. After DRC decides to revise plans, the blue circle indicates that they can do that without lengthening the time. We can just review it before we write our staff report. And the review cycles for our plans here are similar to the permits in that the first cycle is longer than the second one, and all the subsequent review cycles are half the time. So this one would just be 5 days, and it would only go to the reviewers who asked for plan corrections last time. So it's not everyone that gets it again. And if the applicant has elected to attend DRC to discuss the project with staff, or if staff has requested they attend, that would occur a few days after we get the resubmittal typically.
Bed and breakfast come before this commission?
I'm sorry, bed.
Do all applications for a bed and breakfast come before this commission?
Require a special use permit, so yes, but I'd have to look at the code to see if there's a district where it doesn't require a special use permit. So I don't know for sure. I could look that up though. Because your question is whether all do, right? Yeah, I'd have to look that up. If we have an applicant DRC, typically we just literally go through the letter submit that staff provided, and we zero in on, we let the applicant lead the conversation, typically if they've requested it, and we kind of zero in on the particular issues. Usually the planner knows by this point the reason for the applicant DRC. They know that there's a particular question that the customer has or something like that. So we do tend to zero in on that. Those are at the beginning of our DRC meetings so that the applicant doesn't have to sit around for hours waiting on staff to discuss other cases. Time that we do our public hearing notices that the city has to send. So I want to be very clear about this. There's always a lot of confusion. The public hearing notices I'm referring to are not the neighborhood, have nothing to do with the public engagement ordinance or neighborhood meetings. They're what we're required to do by law. Some cities do require the applicants to mail these notices out or publish these notices, but in Kansas City, we do it. Staff does it for the applicant. What we do is we mail notice to all property owners within 300 feet of the subject property. And then notice is just telling them, hey, there's going to be a hearing before the Planning Commission on this date and time at this location. So as we've been doing hybrid or virtual meetings, it's telling people where to find information about how to join those meetings virtually versus coming to the chamber, for example. In addition to doing those mailings, publishing notice, and I believe it's called the legal record. Is that right, Sarah? The name of it? Okay. You could tell I read it frequently. And it's literally the same thing, but it's just published in a publication that I don't even know if they're print anymore. Are they print and digital? Do you know, Sarah?
I think so. Yeah, I believe they are print.
Signs for the property so that people that might be walking or driving by can see something is going on the property. We have not been doing that, although we probably will start soon, giving the signs. We have not been giving signs to customers. We have them in our possession we make them and the customer comes and picks them up. So as you can imagine, in the emergency, that's not been happening. And it actually, I can't remember if it's code or your rules allow you all to waive that requirement. So we've actually been putting in our staff reports that we're not doing it, and it's just automatically waived, so to speak, acknowledging what's going on. But typically we would give those signs to customers, and there should be one sign facing each street. So if it's bound by multiple streets, there would be more than one sign. Sometimes you'll see a fair number of the continuances are because we've done the noticing, but then had an applicant DRC, or maybe the notice went out the day before DRC, and we realize, oh, this is not ready to go forward yet. Or we talk with the customer and they're like, you know what, we want to take the time to work through your comments. We want a continuance. So a fair amount of the continuances are due to the timing issue where the notices have to, by law, happen at a certain time prior to the hearing. But yet in our process, we've just missed that date in terms of understanding whether the case needs to be continued. Public hearing notices.
Not specifically, but I had a question about based on just like conditions and things of that nature. And a lot of those haven't come back. And so I guess I'm just wondering, we'll try to just push through. And then others are a little bit more thoughtful or receptive to maneuvering it. And I think it's hard for at least me to really gauge that, I guess. So I guess I hate to be a sports reporter here and ask you to just talk about that a little bit. But could you like explain kind of?
Yeah, I think I get what you're asking is like, sometimes you get the sense that some people just take a vote whether or not they agree to changing the conditions versus having a conversation about that. And I think the reality is that the decisions for a lot of those projects get made by the city council ultimately. And of course they consider your recommendation, but they can make a different choice. So I think that's a big part of it. And whether you approve or deny a project, it's going to go there next. If you continue a project, it can't go there until you take action, until you approve or recommend approval or denial. So continuance is what they're trying to avoid in those cases, probably. I don't know does that kind of answer your question?
I guess the challenge is like, when do we kind of say like, all right, this doesn't seem, I think we've done a decent job, but sometimes it's hard to parse out whether they're just trying to push through and whether like this is actually worth continuing to try and fix all that stuff before we make a recommendation.
I mean, sometimes staff will suggest on certain cases that if we think we can, if there's an issue with a condition or a plan that needs to be revised, and we've suggested to you that we can work with the customer between now and BZA or CP or city council, then that's because we've had a good working relationship with them all along, and we believe we can continue to do that. So that's probably a good clue as to what flexibility you have. But the bottom line is even if we say that, I mean, as a commissioner, I think if I were in your shoes, I'd want to be comfortable knowing that what left my desk is what's going to happen, to the extent, that I have some control over it. And that's where you have to decide whether you should continue a project or take action to move it forward.
Cool. Thanks.
Joe, I have a question about just caseload. And I think to Commissioner Allender's point about having consistency between the staff people, but do you run into issues where, I'm just thinking our caseload varies a lot. So I'm sure on your end, it's also doing that. Is there some bottlenecking that happens where staff members, you want to have the same staff member look at those cases, but it also causes delay in their review? Does that make sense?
Not really. Our number one goal is to get a finished product in terms of, and by finished product, I mean a project we have influenced it to the extent possible to get it ready for planning commission and to do that on time. That's always our goal. And, you know, the development community everywhere I've ever worked has been sensitive about time. Time is money. I get that. But it's never in our interest to slow a project down because every 2 weeks we have a deadline and we get more applications in. Currently, my staff are averaging 100 active cases. And by active, I mean they're at some point in the process from the time they've applied to closing out a building permit.
How many?
100
100
per planner. So it is true that there could be some bottlenecking, but I think with the ultimate goal being that what I've already stated, I mean, you know, like Chris, for example, I think a docket or two ago had 11 or 12 cases on one docket. And sometimes you'll see other planners have just a couple, and that's just the way things flow. I mean, we try to keep them tied to the project. If Chris is familiar with a particular property, for example, he's done a series of cases on that property. We try to keep him on it because he's familiar with the players in that neighborhood and in that area. He's already familiar with what the policies we have say about that property. So we try to keep him on that, for example, and we would do that with any of our planners. But it does cluster up sometimes, so to speak, where they get a bunch of cases at once, or a bunch come in at once for that particular property or area. Quarter.
Okay.
Yeah, probably about a quarter of them meet that. If they have a plan they're submitting with it, whereas if it's a rezoning without a plan, the review is in some ways more important but simpler at the same time because there's not a plan to review with it. And it's easier to keep the deadline intact, all the deadlines intact for those types of things than it is with a plan. Online that want to, as a staff person online that wants to speak to that, feel free. So the next step is publishing the docket and preparing staff reports. So every Monday morning, me and my staff have a meeting where we go through the dockets, the draft dockets, and we talk about, you know, where's this project at? So for example, for today's cases, we would have on last Monday's meeting kind of gone into detail about the status of the cases because everything for today's meeting has to happen last week from the staff perspective. So we're wanting to make sure that when Chris is looking at his projects, I'm just going to use him as the guinea pig here, that he kind of knows based upon his last communication with the customer, what the status of its cases are, you know, and we talk at that time, well, they're still having a hard time getting this condition clarified with water services. And we strategize at that meeting about how to get that information clarified. We talk about whether, if we've arrived at our recommendation by that point, which we probably should have in most cases. And because all of that's going to go onto the docket, right? So Lisa and Nicole are in the meeting and they're listening to all this and they're taking notes because they're going to prepare the docket based upon what we're discussing at that meeting. Analyzing their staff reports. So we're talking about all that stuff at that meeting and on that Monday and Tuesday. On that Tuesday preceding CPC, they are, the planner finishes the staff report, submits it to me for review. Meeting on that Tuesday. And so we didn't get our staff reports done until Wednesday. And in those cases, in order to meet our ultimate deadline, which is to get the dockets out to you guys by Thursday at noon, I don't review the staff report because that would just slow it down. So all that stuff is happening on that week preceding CPC. We try to publish our docket so that the general public and the applicants know like the order of events on Wednesday at noon, and then we release everything to you all on Thursday at noon.
So I've gotten some complaints about the city clerk releasing the docket before you guys do. And so, because we get the emails and then it's not as detailed and it doesn't have the links. So I was wondering if you guys could like tell the city clerk to not publish it before you guys send us an email. I guess that people have just reached out and said, well, this one doesn't have all the details that you guys have on yours.
Yeah, it's something about the formatting that it's published in on the clerk's site, and we're trying to work on that to figure out what the bottom line is, but I don't know how to fix that, frankly. We're required, they can push it out. I think it's the sunshine law requirement that the clerk's office is trying to meet. So I think their habit is probably to just push it out as soon as, and they do this for multiple boards and committees.
Get a million
So and I
revised.
don't blame them. If I were in their shoes, as soon as I got something, I'd push it out, because you never know when that committee's meeting, and it may be exactly 24 hours after they receive that information. So they're doing it right away. But it is true that the formatting that they send it out, something gets lost in translation, and it's very difficult to interpret the clerk's agenda versus the one we send out.
And I might be missing something, but is the full staff report available in the city clerk's website? I don't think I know where that is.
No, it's just the agenda.
Okay. Is it possible to get the full staff report? Or is that something you just request more formally to say, hey, can I have a staff report for this meeting?
Without getting into the weeds too much on IT stuff, I know that the system they use now is very outdated, and they're replacing it in the midst of replacing it. And we're heavily involved in that, as we want to be, because so much of what we do relates to the software. They use another software that that we use for city council stuff. It's also outdated, and so we're involved in all of that. And that's a good suggestion that we can make, is to try to find out whether the new software they're going to be using would have that capability. Whether it does, I don't know, but we can certainly ask and look into that.
Yeah, that would be huge, I think, because I think whenever I'm looking at a project and I'm trying to understand how to navigate it, being able to look at a similar project and say, okay, they went through this step and then this happened, and it kind of tells the story. I think that would be really helpful, particularly the new developers who are trying to figure out the process.
So you're talking about kind of like what the workflow of a whole project is, like from beginning to end, seeing that somewhere visually?
Yeah. And actually, this is kind of coming from some of my academic work when I was looking at a project and I was trying to understand the history of it and how they went through the entitlement process. It was very difficult without actually reaching out to them, and they were very helpful just getting information directly from the developer. But to be able to see it publicly through the staff report could have probably given me a very similar picture, without having to always feel that you need to reach out to people directly. I'm thinking for some of these smaller incremental developers that are trying to figure out the system, you could point them to that staff report and say, okay, see this project up the street, this is what they did, and here's how they got. And not that it's always the same, but it just gives them a sense of what it looks like.
And we do that a lot in pre-application meetings. We show them similar projects, and a lot of our advice is based upon what we know is typical for a similar request elsewhere, both in terms of the process, but also the expectations and what they might encounter with the neighborhood or the planning commission. But as to your suggestion about, like, Compass is actually has a dashboard for each case, and I know it has currently on there for each case a kind of a color wheel, and I probably actually show it to you guys, that it illustrates theoretically at least where you are in the process, like how much you have done. I have comments about that that I could elaborate on, but I won't right now. I'm going to look to Stacy because I don't know if she knows. There's supposed to also be a workflow map on there too. Do you know what the status of that is? Because it's not showing now on most of our cases, at least.
There is a workflow map that's part of the Compass website. Currently, as a broader city staff, we have decided not to make those workflows publicly viewable yet. Right now, the way that terminology is set up in those workflows is too technically worded for where our comfort level, if the general public could understand what those terms meant, it wouldn't be beneficial to them to have it. It would only cause more confusion than cause more clarity in their situations. There is a major upgrade to the Compass system coming again towards the end of this year, and we're looking at it then of potentially making those workflows available, but we have a lot of work to do on them to clean them up before we're ready to publish them on the website.
And maybe that's a place for the staff report. I don't know. Maybe that would be a better location if you're following the workflow to see what the staff reports were from those meetings. Whatever makes more sense from your side. I just think that having that publicly available would be helpful.
We're working on it, and it sounds like the upgrade might allow us to have maybe a public facing one versus one that staff uses on the backside that's in staff language versus publicly understandable language.
Some of the discussions you and I have had in the past with the old system versus getting through Compass. And that's where, as a project comes together, it's assigned a number based on city planning, number system. And that follows it all the way until you get to the point you're ready to go to get an ordinance for that staff report. And then all of a sudden it's assigned a much different number and they don't correlate or, work together. So you have to find one to find the other or vice versa. And it's sometimes cumbersome. It'd be nice for that number to continue all the way through, but I know it's difficult because of the numbering system for actual ordinances as they're put together. So in some ways, what I've done just maybe to help Ashley to find those things, I know the staff report, when you go to the parcel viewer, they actually are tied into the parcel viewer in some way. And you can click on that to find the actual number. Then you have to go to the city clerk's office to find the ordinance, which eventually pulls up the actual staff report. It is kind of cumbersome, and I know they're working on that to try to get it to be easier to follow and find the information, but they're doing the best they can with what they have available today.
Chairman Crowell, that's absolutely right. One of the things he was alluding to there on the common project number is we have with Compass the ability to do there's a whole module called projects, and we have the ability to do project names and project numbers that identify a project that could be used all the way from a DAT meeting all the way through inspections and certificate of occupancy on a project. We're moving in a direction that would allow us to do that, but it's actually surprisingly difficult to do that because you do have to decide, as you can imagine, with let's say a project like Metro North or Zona Rosa or Twin Creeks, where you're likely to have hundreds and hundreds of individual permits. Tying them all to one project may not make sense. And so the boundaries for where something becomes a project versus a discrete project is what is the difficulty. But Stacy and I are in a group of staff that is actively working on trying to define those boundaries so that we can start utilizing that. And that would hopefully help everyone. It would help staff immensely to be able to see all the work they have related to one project. And we know it would help customers too. But that it is more difficult than you would imagine to figure that out.
But I think through your review process, and then there becomes all of the different permitting processes, whether it's the traffic control plan or sidewalk closure, they get a SD number or some other number, those would be nice to be able to tie it back up to the actual.
Hey, Kobe, you're cutting out a bit.
Sorry, I'm cutting out. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was looking at Stacy because in a lot of ways, the way they write their permits, and the permit is written based on an actual code number for that specific permit. And sometimes it doesn't, go back up to the actual project number so that you can find those at a later date, what those permits are. And it may be cleaned up in Compass now, I'm assuming, because I'm referencing the kind of the older system just as Compass was coming into play.
It is cleaned up a little bit in the Compass system, especially if you're looking at projects that involve a platting process. Because when you get into final plats, there's a lot of conditions that have to be satisfied before those plats can be recorded. Sometimes that's tied to public improvements. Sometimes that's tied to building plans or something that happens on a building site. So when we have plats involved, it's become much easier to kind of link everything that happens afterwards to that plat. So if you have the plat number, you can find like the building case number where the building plans were sent in for code review. You can see them linked together so you can kind of trace it through. It can be cumbersome to do just because of the way our system is set up with all the different permit reviews we have and all the different plan case reviews and all the different permit types we have. But Commissioner Carl was right when he mentioned Parcel Viewer earlier. It's a great resource where if you have an address, you can go to that address and then there's a spot where you can click where it'll show you all the permits and all the plan cases that are tied to that permit. So if you ever are kind of lost and don't know where to start, Parcel Viewer is always a great spot. Whenever I'm starting to review a case for Development Review Committee that I haven't seen before, that's one of my first stops to see if there was a case that's come through there before, so I can see, okay, what conditions did the Planning Commission approve on that prior case, so I have a better understanding of what the expectations could be of what you might approve now. And it looks like Joe's got it pulled up on the screen. Yeah, over to the left side, you can click on a box and it'll give you all the different case numbers. And then when you click on one of those case numbers, it opens up the custom reviewing side of Compass KC, which is the city's online permitting system, where it'll give you the information about that case number. All you'll be able to see is kind of the publicly available information about that case. If you're a contact on that case and are involved with it, once you log into the Compass system, you can see more detailed information about that case. But yeah, unfortunately, just by the way our city does permitting and does plan review, it's a very cumbersome system and it's very confusing. So reaching out to the staff, we're always willing and able to help because we have a little more daily experience with dealing with these nuances, and we'll help you track stuff through if you're having trouble finding the information quickly.
I just thought it would be helpful to show you how you can navigate from Parcel Viewer to Compass. And there's a lot of things on Compass. I agree that it's not wording here we've had concerns with. It's to the general public, you're not always sure which one to select to find what you're looking for. But I think for the general public, what they're more concerned with is when are the hearings, and we do put all that out there. It tells you the times and the status of the hearing for every project that we have. If you wanted to see reviews and who's commenting on things, you can do that as well. Reviewers by name, what department they work for, and what the status of their review is. If you wanted to see their individual comments, you could click on details and see what their comments are. So we do provide a letter for DRC, and of course at CPC, we provide the staff report that takes all these comments and puts them into a letter, but they're also available to anyone on Compass at any time. You unveil soon our development tracker. We're migrating it to Parcel Viewer because Parcel Viewer is just something that's more people are familiar with. It is not live yet, but it will have, this is the working layer. It will have pending cases, which are going to be cases that are pending before the Planning Commission. And as an example, let me see what I can find here. 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 is what it will look like. If someone's interested in a project, they literally just select anywhere within the shaded area and they can see basic information, including the project name. We're going to lead with that at the top. And then the planner, this is a link to the planner's email. And of course, thankfully, since it's not live yet, you can't see the rest. There's more stuff below with direct links to where the plans and the meeting dates are for that case. Or more thoughts about that from the commission?
I think that's great. I like it.
Kind of hoping we can wrap up by then, if that's
Yeah.
all right.
So obviously the next step is the planning commission meeting because we left off with staff reports. The red circle there, of course, indicates that you could always continue the case. And of course, if you did that, it does delay the length of time. I don't feel like I need to explain too much about that since you guys are sitting commissioners. But after that, it does. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not sharing the same screen. Hold on just a second. We're at the city plan commission step. So we're moving over next to the receive revised plans. So if the planning commission recommends approval of a project with plan corrections, the customer has to revise them next. There are rare circumstances where the customer does not revise them, but insists on moving forward to the decision-making body. If that does happen, we put that plan correction in the ordinance if it's a project that goes on to city council. Because whatever we convey to the city council or the BZA is what you have recommended. Exactly. We don't deviate from that in any way. So that process, sometimes it's quite common for after planning commission for there to be a period of a month or two before we hear from the customer again. And I couldn't even begin to tell you the reasons why some people delay it, but some people do. But we're waiting on them to resubmit the plans. This can be difficult for the public who might be following the project because as a planner, we can't tell them when an applicant's going to refile plans unless we know, and we don't always know that. So they want to know, when is it going to city council? We can't tell them. We just have to tell them that's why we want to put a lot of this stuff out on Compass, a non-parcel viewer. But right now they have to just call or email staff over and over again to find out when it might go. So that's why one of the reasons why we introduced the ability to revise plans before CPC when we did that a couple of years ago was in the hopes that it would cut down on that lag time between planning commission and city council so that everyone had more of a clear expectation when the project moved forward or would move forward. Does resubmit, they get 5 days to review. Once we have the plans ready to go, and in other words, all the plan corrections were met, the planner will prepare an ordinance request, which is basically we provide through the city clerk software system the recommendation you guys made, the conditions you recommended, and then eventually the law department receives that, and Sarah's office drafts an ordinance that gets introduced or put on a council docket. There's a number of other things that have to happen with the ordinance request. We have to stamp the approved plans and submit those through the clerk's website. So you'll eventually see when a project gets to the city council's neighborhood planning and development committee, which is where all of your projects go. That's the committee they go to on the city council. You'll eventually see on the clerk's website a PowerPoint, which is the planners, and sometimes the applicant has a PowerPoint as well, or some form of presentation. You'll see the ordinance itself that Sarah prepared. You'll see the CPC staff report. We provide that to them because sometimes the project changes between planning commission and city council, and some of the background is helpful for some council members. Also, we do provide them with a fact sheet related to the ordinance, but it's usually much more abbreviated than a staff report. So that's why we also provide the staff report. Any public testimony we might have received in writing, we upload that as well. After the first reading at City Council, it gets referred to the committee, and then the committee is on a Wednesday in this room, and the planner presents at that committee as well. And they could hold it. The committee chair can hold that ordinance, or they can pass it out of committee. Sometimes they get asked to advance it, which means it would go back to full council for final approval the following day versus the next week. So there's a lot of different options available to the committee at that time. The project is ready for any sort of full building permit. In reality, if someone's ready to go on a project, we do let people file a building permit even before they come to the planning commission. We just don't give them a full approval. We give them a partial approval until they get final approval from the city council or planning commission, whoever has final authority. The only exceptions to that would be like if there's a permit related to a use, for example, that's not allowed until the rezoning is granted, or a special use that's not allowed until the Board of Zoning Adjustment approves it. But there still are times where the applicant really, really wants to move forward and they can do an at-risk permit at that point. So those are always options. After going through the permit process, which itself is a whole other process that I'm not an expert in, which is part of the reason I didn't include it. Typically, we have to review a building permit. My staff reviews the building permit to make sure it matches the plans the planning commission and city council have approved. And it's quite common that the plans have to be resubmitted. I would say about 80% of the time they have to be resubmitted. And in about 60% of those cases, they have to be resubmitted a second time. So there's a lot of resubmittals. So there tends to be, especially the larger the project is. And then after that, my staff is involved at the tail end of the project before a certificate of occupancy to make sure any conditions of approval that we place on the permit have been met. So that's typically for us, when you all approve a landscape plan with a project, there's usually a condition in there that requires a landscape architect to certify that the landscaping has been installed per the approved plan. So we're looking for that letter at that time from the landscape architect. We also sometimes do the same thing for a lighting engineer to make sure it meets the photometric plan that's been approved. And that's when we'd be collecting that information. Abbreviated the permitting part. I'm just not the right guy to give you all the information about that if you were curious. But what questions do you all have about the tail end of this presentation?
Can we get a copy of that slide? Can you
Sure.
send it to us?
Yeah.
Joe, do you have a sense what this process looks like compared to, let's say, other cities around the metro, and then, regionally, nationally? Do you get a sense of where we are? I mean, I will say this is a very quick schedule. If you look nationally, and especially at some of the larger cities, we're moving pretty quickly here. But I just didn't know if you guys had a sense of where we are relative to some other cities.
I can speak more cities that I've worked in, and I've worked in 5 other cities before Kansas City, and this is by far the quickest. And they were all regional. One of them is a suburb of Kansas City. The other one is Lawrence. I'll just tell you it's Lawrence. Leawood is the other city. And then I've also worked in Mission and in Lincoln, Nebraska. And in every case, I think except for Lincoln, we didn't docket a case for planning commission until we got revised plans. So in a lot of communities, that's pretty common. The plans get revised repeatedly until the staff is satisfied that they've met the code or the policies, or they've arrived at a position where they can make a recommendation, comfortably to the planning commission, and then they docket the case. So it's not uncommon in other communities for there to be a period of 2 to 4 months before a case appears on CPC. Here, the pact, so to speak, I guess you could say, with the development community is if you pass QCR, you're at CPC in 6 weeks. And that there's constraints to that. There's what you see as a result of that is sometimes you're wordsmithing conditions at planning commission because there's just not always enough time to work through all that before it gets to planning commission. We try our best, but there's not always enough time to do that. You, Commissioner Sadowski, that we're a little quicker than most in terms of time to get to CPC. I do think there is considerable time after CPC on projects. And when I said, the planners carry 100 cases on average, a fair amount of those cases are cases where it went out, you guys pass it out of CPC, but they've never resubmitted plans. And the planner's just kind of waiting for something to happen, which could happen at any moment, right? So the overall length of the process may be comparable. I don't have a good understanding of it. I will say in most communities, though, you do know, like if you apply on a certain date or you make it to planning commission on a certain date, when you're going to go to council. That's unique. The fact that you don't know here is a little unique compared to, in my experience, in other communities. It can be very quick. We have a number of cases that might be sponsored, for example, by a council member and go to city council's committee the very day after they're here at planning commission. So sometimes it can be very quick, but usually it's more like 3 to 4 weeks after planning commission.
Notable cases that we've seen that city council's decision has been different than ours?
I mean, she sits at the same meetings as we do, and she writes the ordinances or signs them at least. Can you think of a case that they denied that CPC recommended approval of, or vice versa?
I can't think of any. What was the name of that very large project?
Twin Creeks?
Yeah, they didn't accept all of the conditions. So the developer, the one related to the water main.
Yeah.
The council, the council accepted the developer's proposal, which was to dedicate an easement, but not, I can't remember exactly what the condition was that CPC recommended.
It would have required them to build the water main, I think.
Right, it would have required construction, and council didn't approve that. They agreed with the developer's proposal to simply dedicate an easement. But yeah, I can't think of anything where they just made a totally different decision.
At some point, it always happens. It just hasn't happened yet with this commission. But it is much more common that they change the conditions you've recommended or the corrections. And that's if you're ever on to the questions from commissioners about like kind of how to find things online and navigate things. If you ever see anywhere an ordinance that says it's a committee substitute, that's typically it is a substitute because the conditions in it deviate from what you all recommended or what was introduced. So what we would always have introduced in our ordinance request is exactly what you recommended. And then, of course, if the committee says, well, I don't agree with this condition and that condition, then Sarah would have to draft a committee substitute, sometimes within minutes, I think, to get it passed.
Comments here, just had a few little house cleaning items. If there isn't anything else or any questions we have on the actual development process, I'm assuming no. So a couple things we wanted to bring up. We've talked in the past about the comprehensive plan and having a couple of members of the planning commission be a part of that. I know there's been a few that have requested to be a part of that, and trying to keep it limited to just, one or two members of that. And so talking to Jeff Williams, Director Williams, and thinking through that, I believe the best for the commission would be for Ashley and Bruce to represent the Planning Commission on the comprehensive plan. So if you guys are still willing to do that, I'd like to make that happen, and for you guys to represent the Planning Commission and report back, as needed when you actually have meetings or participate in different things and what's going on. Something we haven't celebrated and forgot to do at the last meeting, Jamie Hickey had her baby. So just want to say congratulations to her.
Sorry for not mentioning that. And I realize most of you probably didn't know she was even pregnant since you hadn't ever met her face to face. But yeah,
Very true. What she have?
she had a boy named Graham,
Oh,
and they have a
cute.
daughter. She and her husband have a daughter named Sloan, who's 2, I believe.
All right. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Okay, so the next item I had, and something we've been talking about with various commissioners outside of meetings here, and that's implementing time limits for each of the cases. And I think that'd be a great idea. And so just throwing it out, don't have to decide today, but Cokeithia is going to help maintain time limits on cases, especially when applicants and even sometimes when some of the general public provide their testimony, that we stay on task and be brief in comments. But something I was thinking and wrote down for like a typical type of session, the staff reports are right around 5 minutes. Applicants have about 15 to 20 minutes in their presentation, and that includes their presentation and comments that they may have about their project. Public testimony, limiting that to 2 minutes per individual, and trying to minimize the amount of repeat type of testimony. But if we have someone that's speaking on behalf of a group, like a neighborhood association or some other type of group, committee, council, or whatever, allow them 5 minutes to speak on behalf of the full group. And then afterwards, then you have a rebuttal by the applicant, and probably another 3 to 5 minutes, give or take, on that, just to go through the public testimony and comments that were brought up, that they can talk about those items. And then after that, then allow the commission to provide a discussion about the case before we make an actual motion and decision. So I'm throwing that out as something to think about. And what it'll do is actually help staff make sure that they talk to the applicants and as they call it, the clients, because sometimes they ask, how long do we get to actually speak and present our case or our item? So we want to make sure we give staff if they can limit it to 15 to 20 minutes and that kind of thing, that I think that's reasonable amount of time to present a case. If it's going to be a larger case, I think that they need to let you know, because some of those cases that have a lot of meat to them, they take a little bit more time to get through the issues, just to let us know, and then we can kind of set a time limit on that. But for the most part, a typical case, 15 to 20 minutes is plenty of time.
Could we add a detail about resident presentations too? I know we had one last time, which I think they could be valuable, but I think that example showed us that they were just explaining us the area plan process, and I didn't think we went on for like 15 minutes on that.
Yeah, you have us to help explain that. Yeah, so you could do that.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. Somebody like that's representing a committee or group, on behalf of a group, 5 minutes is plenty of time for that.
Totally.
I would think.
So Kobe, I have no problems to vote on that today.
I'm sorry.
I said, I don't have no problem with voting on that today.
Okay.
I don't think you
I
have
don't know if you
to.
really need to vote on it. I think it's just basically we're establishing a guideline for a typical case that we'd like to follow. And if it gets, again, if it gets way out of hand, Kokithia said she's going to start keeping a stopwatch, but we can also set a clock up here at the front, just to let them know how long they've taken.
I'm the same as Commissioner Beasley. I think that's a fair time frame, and I think that's pretty consistent with what people get for council.
Yeah.
So if we just establish that guideline, you want me to state that again?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay, so the guideline we're looking for on a typical case that we want to implement as a commission, basically is a staff report, 5 minutes. Applicants given 15 to 20 minutes, and that includes their presentation. 2 minutes per individual, and trying to limit the amount of repeat testimony, and then 5 minutes for a neighborhood association group or something that can speak on behalf of several individuals. Complete, have applicant restate their items, a 3 to 5 minute process after that. Then it's back to the commission to have discussion and make decision.
I'm good with that. I just have a question for Joe, like about getting the word out to maybe neighborhood associations so that if they do show up and they have a presentation, that they have a sense that they're going to be timed.
Guys, beforehand to the staff planner.
We would typically know in advance. They don't have to give it to us because they could, well, nowadays, yes, they would have to give it to us in advance because of Zoom. But we would typically know in advance of if someone's going to give a presentation, whether they're an applicant or a citizen, because they've typically asked us about it. I don't think that the questions would go away. It's more just for us to understand what this commission's preferences are, so that we convey that to the citizens and to the and we never say, you get 2 minutes, period. Nothing more. We're never, we make it very clear that this is the expectation. The chair may use his discretion to go shorter or longer, depending on the situation. So we just have people asking, and we feel like we have a good understanding of what the past commission's expectations are. We just wanted to gain an understanding of what this one's were. I guess one question I have real quick, Mr. Chair, if I can, is so we have a lot of applicants ask us if you all expect a presentation from them, and we've always said no. Is that still true for this commission?
And I agree. I don't think we expect a presentation. We do want to have them present at the meeting so that they can state that, at least some kind of statement that they understand what staff has spoken about, they agree with everything that's said, and they agree with the conditions. If they want to provide a presentation, they sure can, but they certainly don't have to.
Yeah.
I would just add that I echo that. I don't think they have to have a presentation, but if it's a larger project, I really would encourage them to bring somebody that has some technical background, just so they can answer some of those questions. We've had some presentations where we've asked questions and there's kind of been we're not sure, we'd have to talk to somebody else. And I think really having that background in the room is important.
Possible to get a copy of that presentation like the day before or something like that. So that way we're not, you just have a little bit of familiarity with it, or do they tend to bring it the day of the meeting?
Yeah, they tend to bring it the day of. I mean, we could ask people to provide it the day before and email it to you guys. I think it also depends on the type of presentation they prepare.
Yeah.
Sometimes it might not be about their testimony as well.
I guess the only thing that I would think about with a presentation, that would be helpful. Which we've seen is if they have differing opinions on the conditions, I think it's helpful to explain that. Or this doesn't need a presentation, but when we had the Airbnb and he didn't get the 55% adjacent, but you guys and he explained that there were essentially absentee landlords. And so I came into that thinking, I don't like this. This doesn't sound good, but that kind of detail, whether it's in a presentation or clarification is really helpful. And if we can get it beforehand, that would be, I think it would speed it up because I would have less questions as it's presented. So.
Yeah.
Between ourselves and the council, I'd like to have that loop feedback on what why the council had a difference from the commission.
Are you asking? I've worked in communities where we gave a summary of cases that came from CPC to council, what the council did. Did they approve it? Did they deny it? Is that what you're asking for, or are you asking for?
I'm not worried about whether if it just goes through with our recommendations. I'm not too worried about that. But I'm actually, if there's a difference from what we recommended to what council actually approved, that feedback would be interesting to me. Understand why council had a different recommendation to what the planning commission did.
Oh, why?
The example would be the why on the water main.
Yeah. I don't know why. I couldn't answer that question for you there. I don't know what I mean, I suppose we could listen to the audio from the meeting to see if there was specific testimony as to why they made the decision they made, but I don't know that there was.
Well, if we don't know the why, at least for us to understand that there was a difference from where we went from the planning commission, what was approved at city council. I just think that feedback loop would be
an agenda item to just to summarize for you guys what you saw, like, so in some cases it's gonna be something you saw at the last meeting, and in other cases it's gonna be 6 months ago, and just let you know what the final outcome of it was. Yeah, I think we could do that.
Item or thing to talk about is our next training session. Since we had this training session today, are we still wanting to look at September? Because the topics we had still listed as topics we want to do in our training include the stormwater management, impact fees, parkland dedication fees, and blight regulations. That everybody has on those topics, and maybe there's others. But I kind of suggest that we still maintain the September training session to go over, because I think 3 of those we can cover in one training session within an hour and a half, where the blight is probably something that needs to be its own topic and other people providing that discussion. That's just a...
Mr. Chair, does that include your idea of a fund? Is that where the impact fees come, where established or the developer feeds into, so at a later date when Public Works or the city has the money?
Don't have that, and I think that's probably something this group to talk about, because I think you're thinking of like a regional detention, that if a developer, instead of providing detention on their site, they provide money to a fund that can actually go to a much larger.
Yeah, I think it was one of your ideas, which on one of the cases that we heard, and I thought it was not a bad idea that the developer still contributes, but it may not be, the city may not have the money to upgrade curbs and guttering and so forth. So I like that idea of looking at how the developer, just because the city doesn't have the
something we can issue forward, that these are some things we're seeing on some of our cases, and how it'd be good to have a more comprehensive look, not just the on-site, but a comprehensive look. And I do know that the American Public Works Association they've been going through their stormwater criteria, standards, and that kind of thing. They're trying to adjust them. And one of the big recommendations they'd really like to see, and they have to get Mark to help push this, and that's more regionalized studies and watershed management versus individual city management and that kind of thing. So that's probably a topic you and I can talk about offline, and maybe how we can help guide that, and even through your comprehensive plan, you can help guide some of that criteria in the comprehensive plan as well. Do we want to set a date for training, so at least we have that on our calendars? Want to wait and then try to schedule that at a later date?
Are we talking a separate date from CPC hearings? Are you trying to a separate date?
I'm going to say yes, simply because today's meeting is frankly an anomaly. This doesn't happen very often, where you have every case continued to where we'd have extra time to do some of this training and discussion. And I don't know what our next dockets look like, the 1st and the 15th of September. You know, if they're long dockets or average dockets or what.
Long. I think you can continue today a number of cases to the 15th. But I don't think the 1st is very long. The issue with the 1st is that I don't know that we'd have, in all 4 of those scenarios, we need to bring in people from other agencies to come and help speak to those issues. And I don't think that we have the time to do that but by September 1st. So
So where does the Labor Day holiday fall in September? Anybody know offhand?
So the CPC meetings in September are the 1st and the 15th.
Yeah.
And then that provides, 2 solid weeks, and then before the CPC meeting in October, which is October 6th.
we couldn't really meet September. Might be able to.
Could we just
in the
send
morning.
a poll around via email?
Yeah, I can do that.
And then we could see who's all available and figure out the best time.
Yes, I can do that. On
A
yours.
doodle around to check
can do that,
everybody's availability for the next training session. Anything else anybody wants to discuss? If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Thank you.